Welcome to the Data Brilliant podcast with me, Joe DosSantos, Chief Data Officer at Qlik. In this series, we explore how data is reshaping and redesigning the future of our business and personal worlds. Today, I'm joined by Mike Massimino, former NASA astronaut, author, and TV personality. Today, we'll be exploring the vital role of data throughout Mike's career at NASA and considering the importance of determination, patience, and innovation thinking from high-pressure environments of space expeditions and maybe from your world as well as a whole. Welcome to Data Brilliant, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Joe. My pleasure to be here.
So you have a very interesting origin story. There's a story that you tell about being a child watching the moon landing and saying, someday, that's going to be me. But it wasn't a really easy, simple journey for you to get to your first rocket, was it?
No, it wasn't. And I don't know if I really said that someday that's going to be me. I think, no, my personality was more like someday I hope that will be me. And I dreamt about it, as you said. I was 6 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and that really captured my heart and soul. It really did capture me and never let go of what I was interested in. But I never thought it would be possible, Joe. I thought that becoming an astronaut was, as I got older, was something that was not for me. I didn't like heights. I still don't like heights. I was not much of a thrill seeker kind of kid. I had no interest in, and plus the whole idea just seemed crazy as I got older, that how do you ever become something like that? So I kind of gave up on it, and it wasn't until after I got out of college. I was an engineer, and I went through college to study engineering and was working as an engineer. And then I decided that I needed to do something about this little boy dream. It wasn't going to go away. It had been with me my whole life. And I needed to at least try to become an astronaut. If I couldn't do that, get involved with the space program and direct my career toward what I thought was important to me.
But you are an astronaut now, or at least you were. So how many flights did you do, and how many trips, and what's the most interesting thing you saw up there?
Once you get to space, it's just another one of these unbelievable experiences that are so unique. I think it's the coolest thing people can do. But out of all of it, I would say the most extraordinary thing I've gotten to do was spacewalk at the Hubble Space Telescope. We're about 100 miles higher than space station, so we can see the curve of the planet from up there, and it's just glorious. And it's kind of this mix of doing your job, of concentrating on what you're doing. You're getting to do what you think is really important. I felt a lot of responsibility given to us, and we didn't want to mess it up. So we worked really hard to be ready. And during the spacewalks, we did the best we could to take care of each other and get the job done and concentrate on our job. But when you're out there, and just any moment you can steal a look of the planet or the stars or just the environment around you, it's just amazing. And I would say probably the most extraordinary thing I see was our planet. We could see the curve of the planet. We could see the thinness of the atmosphere and just its beauty. And I felt that I was looking into heaven. Remarkable. I felt like I was looking into an absolute paradise. Remarkable. Looking at our planet from space.
So in this podcast, we talk a lot about decision-making and analytics. And, one of the things that'd be interesting for listeners to hear is you were under some pretty high pressure situations, and you're trying to deal with maybe some information, probably computer systems that weren't nearly what they are right now. How did you go about making decisions, and what information did you have at your disposal, and how did you go about doing that under a high pressure environment?
Yeah, with a good point. The shuttle. We just recently had a SpaceX launch with this new spaceship that is really a 21st century spaceship. A lot of automatic systems and touch screens, and a lot of stuff just goes automatically for you. And on the shuttle, it was 10 years since we have launched a shuttle nearly. But it really was 40 years since we had a new spaceship is really more accurate. We hadn't launched a new spaceship in 40 years. So we're going back to 1981 when we launched the space shuttle for the first time. And that was built in the 70s. So we had all the computing power that was available in the 1970s. And it really didn't change much. It was very manually intensive, such that the commander and pilot were looking at things. 2 mission specialists as flight engineers were behind them helping. And when we would get a warning or a signature, we would call it, we had to try to figure out what it was, what the problem was. And it was sometimes very cryptic. but there was not a lot of computing power. It could tell you, the machine, the shuttle could tell you what was wrong, but then it was up to you to figure it out. And the folks on the ground, we were so dependent on the ground because they were able to get a lot more data than we could get in the cabin. Over the years, they were able to get more telemetry down to the ground, and they had lots of people to look at lots of screens to interpret that data. So we had a whole standing army of people to help us with that. So it was a lot of people looking at lots of data, trying to figure out what was going on. And that's why we did so many simulations. The space station now was highly automated with laptop computers, and now we have the SpaceX vehicle, which is really highly automated. So things have really changed over the decades.
It's really remarkable to think, though, that there's more computing power on your laptop than there was on the space shuttle. Get more information from.
Oh, by far, by a long shot. Yeah, but yeah, that's the way it was.
And I also I can only picture you. You get more information looking out the window than you do looking at the telemetry on your computer screen.
Yeah, and of course, when these programs first started, we didn't necessarily trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
So the thing was, you can't trust that. It's just situational awareness. So that's what they called it, to help.
Well, you are a little bit at the avant-garde part of technology as the first person to actually have a tweet in space. You want to tell our listeners what that tweet said and kind of any genesis of that story? How did that tweet come to be?
This is back for my second space flight, which happened in May of '09. And when you're getting ready for a space flight, you're kind of not really paying attention to very much else going on in the world. And I think that's pretty typical. And certainly that's the way it was for me. And I kind of remember hearing about Twitter starting sometime like before then in '08. I guess I heard about it. I remember President Obama tweeting during his inauguration in January, getting close to where we were going to fly, and I heard about that. I thought that's kind of interesting. And then NASA came to me. So a lot of things that happen in life, Joe, I think are just kind of serendipity, or just saying yes to things. People will ask you to do something, and you say yes, and sometimes things will happen that you can never even imagine. And this is what happened, is the NASA Public Affairs Office came to me. Actually came to my commander first and asked him if he was okay with it. Timing-wise, our flight being in May of '09, they wanted to get NASA involved with social media, and they wanted an astronaut to tweet from space. So, but what happened, Joe, is that when I first met Neil Armstrong, when I was a new astronaut, the first time I met him was right after I became an astronaut. And the question I asked him was, when did you come up with what you said on the moon? This one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And I asked him that. I go, wait, how'd you come up with that? Did your wife tell you to say that? Did you hire a publicist? It's pretty good. He goes, and he looks at me and he said, Mike, no. He said, I didn't think about it until after I landed on the moon. And I go, really? And he said, Mike, if I didn't land on the moon, there'd be no reason to say anything.
Fair enough.
Because you got to concentrate on the mission first. And he was very serious. He looked at me, Mike, you're new at this, but you've got to concentrate on taking care of the spaceflight mission first and worry about all that other stuff later. So it's like, I got it. And years later, I get asked to send the first tweet, and the press has asked me what I'm going to tweet. I said, look, Neil Armstrong said, don't worry about it until I get there. And that's what I did. And when I got there and I opened up the computer and I'm floating around, I realized that was like the worst advice I ever got in my life, Joe. I had no idea what to write. And I wrote, launch was awesome and some other stuff. I'm feeling great. And they made fun of me on Saturday Night Live. They said, in 40 years, we've gone from one giant leap for mankind to launch was awesome. So, yeah.
Tough time to get right.
That's what happened. That's the story behind it. Yeah. So, yeah, prepare for everything, including a tweet, I guess, the first tweet from space.
So let's actually transition over to your current, more academic life. So now you are a big advocate of STEM research. You teach engineering at Columbia. So tell us about how that happened and about your passion for engineering and the afterlife of an astronaut. You mentioned you never stop being an astronaut. You just spend more time on the ground, I suppose.
Yeah. I worked as a research engineer after graduate school at the Johnson Space Center, and then I kept getting rejected from being an astronaut. I was rejected 3 times, including a medical disqualification on my 3rd try, which pretty much signaled the end once you're medically disqualified. And I was going to fight it. It was a problem with my eyesight, and I was going to try to see if I could do something about it. But I also knew that was becoming, this whole dream was becoming less and less likely, particularly after being disqualified. So I started thinking about, well, what else would you want to do if this just can't happen? What else? And I thought about the academic career. I enjoyed my time at Columbia as an undergrad and my time in grad school at MIT. And I was teaching part-time at Rice University. I was teaching a control systems class there.
So your colleagues are coming from lots of different backgrounds. You have geologists, you have biologists, and my guess is that they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. So tell me a little bit about kind of the differences from the different people that came to NASA and how that influenced some of the dynamics, some of the teamworks, and some of the options that young people have today to get to NASA.
I really like that question because it may not be obvious to people of where you come from, but it is really varied, and I think there's maybe a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's diversity is really important, and we know that diversity of background, of ethnicity, of gender, but it's also a diversity of thought. And by getting people from different backgrounds, if you look at the astronaut corps now, it's much different than what you saw in the original seven. The original seven were all military test pilots, all white American males. And my astronaut class had about maybe 25-30% women. The last two astronaut classes are 50% women. I think we see that in STEM now as well. When I was an engineering student, I don't know what the ratio was in engineering school, but it was very highly male.
Mm-hmm.
Now at Columbia and at MIT, the two schools I was educated at, they're 50-50 in the engineering schools, male, female. That's one part of it. But it's also diversity of culture, of ethnicity, of where you're from around the world. We had 8 different countries represented in my astronaut class in the United States plus 7 others. And when you get these different ways of thinking, you get diversity, not just of people, but the way they approach problems. And so the only way you're going to solve our complex problems that we have in the world today is by having people who think differently. And again, my friend Alan Bean told me this. He said, if everyone thinks the same way, we'd have never gotten to the moon. If everyone thinks the same way, you never build a space station, go back to the moon, and so on. So we need that diversity.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you about as you talk through those teammates is teamwork. One of the things we've described how, you're looking out the window for data. You don't trust the computers. You don't have that much information. And we always talk about analytics being a team sport. You've got to rely on the people on your left and right. Can you tell us a little bit about the reliance on those people to your left and right, especially in those super high pressure situations?
Yeah, you really are dependent on each other to keep each other alive. And now it's different. Now it's become more automated, but you still depend on the folks on the ground and the people that are next to you in the cockpit to help. And we do trust automation a lot more. We have a lot more data, as we said, AI, other things are helping out. So, but we still want to monitor things and be engaged. But as far as that trust, you mentioned all the things that become an astronaut. Being able to analyze data, academic achievement. The thing, though, that you would add to that is what you just mentioned, which is being able to be a team player, to truly put the well-being and the success of the team over your individual success. And that is, I think, the quality that is probably most hard to detect in people, but also maybe the most important one, because lots of people have very good credentials, right? But who is the person you're going to want next to you? Who's the person you're going to trust with your family, with your life, with the mission, so that you can trust them when you make your mistake. When you make mistakes, they're going to be there to help you and not going to ridicule you, but will stick by you and try to get through it. And so that is really important. And that trust is a trust between the crew members, but also the trust between technology and the people who help get you ready. You talked about data. We used to have this saying, you trust your equipment, and I think that you have to build the trust in your equipment, whether it's your spacesuit, your parachute, your spaceship, but it's also now trusting the data. And that comes in a lot in the flying game, where you realize that sometimes you're in a cloud, you can't see well, but you're trusting your instruments. You trust the data that's coming into you. When you're flying an approach with GPS, you trust that technology, and you build up that trust over time. But you have to trust the data, you have to trust each other, and trust your equipment. and that allows you to get through. And the the feeling you have for the people next to you is that you're going to cover each other, and that you're going to make sure, number one, that everyone's okay. And it may seem in some ways the obvious thing is that you're going to make sure that everyone comes back, and you're going to take care of each other's health, and you're not going to leave a person behind, and make sure everyone's safe and all that.
I wanted to actually ask you a little bit about failure. In analytics development, it's now very trendy to say fail fast, or, and there's lots of applications and good use for that. And agile methodologies come along that basically say we want to make really small mistakes so that we don't make really big mistakes. And it seems that it might even be hard to make a small mistake in space. Right? You can't really fail fast and oops. So what is the thought process there in terms of trying to fail fast or trying to make the mistakes in a safe place? How do you go about that?
There's a lot there, I think, Joe. The what we want to do is we want to fail on the ground so we don't fail in space. Fail down here so we don't fail up there. So when we do our training, we are thrown just about every anomaly that you can imagine. Some are experienced as you're training, whether it's a spacewalk or in your flying the vehicle or whatever system you're working on or working the robot arm. You'll make mistakes in training, and then you'll say, okay, let's not let that happen. Here's a solution. And then you'll imagine, well, what happens if this happens or that happens? And you'll try to have as many backup plans as you can. And you train on the ground to do that with your team. So when you do the team, meaning not just your astronaut team, but also your ground control team. So the simulations we do are pretty complex problems that we all need to work on. And when you get to space flight, the way I see it is that there's like a list somewhere out there in the universe of everything that can go wrong. I'm making this up, but there's like an imaginary list out there with everything that can go wrong with something. And you can imagine a few of those and click those off and be prepared for those problems. You can experience those in your training, you click those off, but there's always a portion of that list that you can't imagine happening, and you've never encountered it before. And those things are still going to happen to you when you get to space flight. The other thing about making mistakes that I want to add here, Joe, just quickly, is that there's something I learned in my training. I learned it actually from a Marine pilot named CJ Sturkow. And CJ said, and to me in one of the sims, he said, I made a mistake, or someone made a mistake in the sim, which happens. You are going to make mistakes, particularly when you do it. As you say, you're going to do things, whatever you want to call it, fail fast or whatever, but you're going to make a mistake. Some are going to be little and embarrassing, or some are going to be like really bad. You need to fess up, right? You don't keep those things a secret, but you need to let it pass. And we called it 30 seconds of regret, which means give yourself 30 seconds. You can beat yourself up with, oh man, that was the worst, stupidest thing. I can't imagine I did that. I'm an idiot. Beat yourself up for 30 seconds. Don't vocalize any of this because you might scare people if they can hear you. But just beat yourself up for 30 seconds and then say, look, that's done. It's in the past. My team needs me. I need to move on and try to at least be helpful, not drag everybody else down. But try to at least do nothing, do nothing to make it worse, but hopefully be helpful. But that 30 seconds of regret is something that I when I made my mistakes, that's what I tried to remember. I was really dumb. That was stupid. I got to leave it behind me and move on.
Acknowledge and move on. I just wrote that down. I intend to crib it and steal it for the rest of my life. So thank you for that 30 seconds of regret.
That's what it's there
Fantastic.
for, man. I hope it's helpful.
I think the thing that's remarkable about that story is that you're developing a problem-solving mindset. So the failure in the ground is not only preparing for the specific symptom of failure, but you're actually developing an entire kind of culture of what to do under crisis. You're building up the kind of the strength of your mind to think under pressure. It's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
I think that's absolutely right. It's a culture that there's nothing that we cannot solve together. And if we want to talk about space movies, the movie Apollo 13, I think showed that really well. And that working of the ground control team and the flight director and the crew and everybody pitching in to find out a way to pull off the impossible. And Alan Bean, a spacewalking astronaut, once told me, he said that at NASA, we're asked to do the impossible. They thought going to the moon was impossible. Developing the space shuttle, fixing Hubble, all these things that we do at NASA, we think are impossible, or when we first hear about them. But they're not impossible if you attack it as a team and you have that, well, we're going to figure out a way to do it. We can talk about it. And then you find out, well, it's not impossible. It's really, really hard. And I think that's what our culture was there. What was even more amazing, I think, is like we're showing in the movie Apollo 13 and in the story I just told you, is that it's not just having months to prepare or years to prepare for something or even days, but it's sometimes like, we need an answer here really quick.
Right.
And we don't have a solution. I was outside spacewalking and I can't stay out there indefinitely. We eventually going to run out of life support. We were planning for 6.5 hours. That one spacewalk went a little over 8, one of the longest ever in the history of the space shuttle program. But that's really pushing it there. So you don't have a lot of time to think about it. And you don't even have that full 8 hours, because even if you come up with a solution in a couple hours, that's not good enough. You need to come up with a solution quickly because you still have everything else you're supposed to do that day.
Right.
So if you delay, you may have 20 minutes or so or half an hour. You've got to be quick on it, because if not, you're going to have to come inside.
So you got your 30 seconds of regret, then focus and move on.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
I can only imagine. I think we've all had those incidences of stripped screws. And it's the most aggravating thing in the world on the ground in your backyard. Never mind in space.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought of, Joe. I remember looking at the planet and I felt so alone. I never felt more alone at that point, because I felt like I had really messed up. And I'm here in my own little spacesuit. Mike Good, my buddy, was out there with me, but I was like, man, who's going to, looking back in the crew, or my folks inside, my friends inside of the space shuttle. But I remember looking down at the Earth. I was like, man, there's billions of people down there. Who's going to help me? And as I was looking, like, hey, where's the closest hardware store? We're nowhere near it. It's far away. Way down there. But what I forgot, and I think what's important to remember, is that our team's still in place.
What advice could you give someone? There's somebody right now listening who is just like you, 6 years old, watching the moon landing. What advice could you give to someone like that who wants to be in the space program in the future?
I think that. The possibilities, we can't even imagine what they're going to be like. When I was a little boy at 6 years old, if I would have looked at what was going on with Neil Armstrong and said, I want to be, I did say that, I want to be one of those guys. Well, I would have had to have been, first of all, I'd have to be a lot shorter, because I'm 6'3", and the height limit back then was 5'11". So that would have undermined, I couldn't have done that. And also I've had to be a military test pilot if I looked at what the original astronauts were. And that wasn't in the cards for me either. So I would have never even imagined that. But I think the most important thing I could tell anybody, Joe, is that there's a difference between something being impossible and something being unlikely. And I think that's a very data-driven way to look at it, the way I looked at it. And there were times where I thought that the chances of me becoming an astronaut were impossible. But impossible, as all of your data listeners, or just about anybody knows, I think, impossible means the probability is 0.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the case. The possibility was just unlikely, improbable. So my chance of becoming an astronaut might have been 1 out of 1,000,000 if you looked at everything. But that's not 0, is it, Joe? That's a non-zero outcome. That is non-zero. And it might be small, but it still is non-zero. And the only way that probability is 0, and you know what the outcome is, and it is impossible, is if you don't try, or if you try and then give up. If you give up, you know the outcome. And then with certainty, you can say you will not be able to achieve it. Fantastic. But as long as you try, there's always that chance.
So how can our listeners find more Mike Massimino?
Well, I have a website, MikeMassimino.com. I'm still active on Twitter from that first tweet. It's at @Astro_Mike. Instagram, been active there, not as long, just the last couple of years, but that's been growing, and I'm Astro Mike Massimino there. At Facebook, Mike Massimino. So all those places are where you can find me.
Social media darling.
And on this, there you go, and on this podcast now too.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Mike, today. It's been a real pleasure.
Joe, the pleasure's been mine, and I really appreciate the questions and taking the time. And And it's a very interesting topic. It's just an interesting way to look at things of how important data is in our life. And I think not just in our jobs, but also in our lives in general of looking at of how we can do things. And the data shows us different a lot of time. And a lot of times that's good.
Mike Massimino is a former NASA astronaut, an author, a TV personality, and a guy who knows the difference between unlikely and impossible.